Welcome to my channel and thanks for watching. He hugged me and took me to the shower. He turned on the water. The water I didn't have at my house, we continued. Here I was curious about the package, so I took it in my hand and opened my mouth as it disappeared in my mouth. I slowed down and stopped with the sound it made. I hadn't experienced something like this. For a long time, his gaze from above said, "Continue." He raised his head and closed his eyes tightly. It was as if he was deeply moved. He continued rapidly one after another, saying, "It's coming, trust me. You always experience this excitement. Whether you're experienced or young, oh hello, were you here? So let me start from the beginning. It started as a simple favor. That's what I told myself anyway. When you live in a quiet cul-de-sac, everyone knows everyone else, and little requests like borrowing a cup of sugar or watching someone's dog aren't unusual. So when the neighbors asked me to keep an eye on their house while they went on a family vacation, I didn't think. Twice the Thompsons were a nice enough family, always friendly, and passing their two sons, Ethan and Liam, were in their early 20s, full of the kind of energy and charm that made me smile every time they waved while mowing the lawn or bringing in groceries. I'd often catch them shooting hoops in the driveway or washing their car with music, blasting the youthful laughter. Carrying over to my side of the fence, Ethan, the younger one, had this easygoing confidence about him. Sandy brown hair that always seemed perfectly messy, and a grin that could light up a room. Liam, a couple of years older, was more reserved but no less striking, with dark eyes that hinted at a quieter intensity. Both of them had grown up next door, and while I'd always seen them as the kids next door, there was no denying they weren't kids anymore. The family left town on a sunny Friday morning, their SUV packed to the brim, with suitcases, snacks, and a cooler for Therode. I waved goodbye from my porch, thinking nothing of it, just another routine week where I'd water their plants and bring in the mail. But then the water went out. It happened 2 days. After they left, I was in my kitchen, enjoying the rare quiet of a Saturday morning. When my husband Peter mentioned it, he was busy with work and spent most of his time up in his office, leaving me to deal with the day to annoyances of suburban life. "The water's out next door," he said casually, as though it wasn't about to become the turning point in my life. So being the neighborly person I was, I walked over to check. It was strange stepping into their house. Without them there, the air felt still heavy with the absence of the life that usually filled it. The familiar scent of their home, a mix of clean laundry and something faintly woodsy, lingered as I walked through, checking faucets and making sure everything else was in order. That's when I saw it, a small handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "If there's any trouble, call Ethan," below that his number was neatly scrolled in. Black inky stared at it for a moment longer than I probably should have, my heart skipping. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, just a neighborly gesture to let him know about the water issue. Nothing more. But as I stood there in the empty house with sunlight streaming through the kitchen window and the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound, something shifted just as I was about to call. The number scrolled on the note. Something caught my attention, the faint, unmistakable sound of water running. For a moment, I thought I must have imagined it. After all, the water was supposed to be out, wasn't it? But then it grew louder, more distinct, the steady rhythm of droplets striking tile, curiosity over caution. As I followed the sound, my bare feet softly across the wooden floor, the noise led me to the bathroom at the end of the hall. The one the boys used. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack I could see steam curling out, clinging to the cool air of the hallway. My heart raced as I pushed the door open, a little further, enough to peek inside. And there he was, Ethan. He stood under the stream of water, his head tilted back, droplets clinging to his sun-kissed skin as they cascaded over him. The shower door was frosted, but not enough to obscure the shape of him. Lean-toned, the body of someone who spent their days moving, living. Ding, my breath caught in my throat. What was he doing here? Weren't they all supposed to be out of town? I knew I should leave. I should quietly step back, pretend I hadn't seen anything, and walk out of the house like none of this had happened, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the spot, my mind ring with questions and something else, something I didn't want to name but couldn't deny, as if sensing my presence. Ethan turned, his movements unhurried for a moment. I thought the frosted glass would save me, but then his gaze locked onto mine through the haze of steam. He didn't flinch. He didn't cover himself. He just stood there watching me as I watched him, the air between us growing heavier with each passing second. I opened my mouth to say something, anything to break unbearable tension, but the words wouldn't come. My hand tightened around the edge of the door frame, as his lips curved into the faintest tint of a smirk as though he knew exactly what was running through my mind. Finally, he stepped out, a towel slung low around his hips, droplets still trailing down his chest. His proximity was electric, and I could feel the heat radiating off his skin as he stood before me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "I thought you were on vacation." I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. His smirk widened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he reached past me, his arm brushing mine as he grabbed another towel from the rack. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me, an undeniable spark that left me feeling dizzy. "I stayed behind," he said. Finally, his tone casual, like we were discussing the weather and not standing mere inches apart in his family's empty house. I wanted to ask why, I wanted to demand an explanation, to remind him that this wasn't appropriate, that I shouldn't be here, but I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on me, drowning out every rational thought, and then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against my wrist, the touch so gentle it could have been accidental, if not for the way his eyes stayed fixed on mine. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost teasing. It was such a simple question, but it shattered something in me. The polite facade, the carefully constructed boundaries, the years of being the dependable neighbor, the faithful wife, all of it crumbled in that instant. "I should go," I whispered, but my body betrayed me by staying exactly where I was. But Ethan didn't step back. Instead, his hand lingered, his thumb tracing slow, deliberate circles against my skin. The tension between us was unbearable, and yet I didn't want it to end. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was the inevitability of it all, the slow unraveling of everything we were supposed to be. But before I knew it, the space between us disappeared, and his lips were on mine, soft and insistent, igniting something I hadn't felt in years. The kiss was brief, just a moment stolen out of time, but it was enough to set my world spinning when we pulled back. His eyes searched mine, questioning, challenging, daring me to admit what we both already knew. The heat of that moment hung in the air, as tangible as the steam clinging to the bathroom walls. I hadn't planned on staying. I hadn't planned on any of this. But my feet betrayed me. Every step I took toward the front door felt impossible. Like I was walking through quicksand, each moment taking longer than it should. Before I turned, I felt Ethan behind me, his presence magnetic, drawing me back. My breath caught as I looked up at him, still wrapped in nothing but the towel that hung around his hips, clinging to his body as if he didn't want to let go either. His skin was shiny, still damp, catching the dim afternoon light seeping through the frosted bathroom window. He moved closer, the air between us buzzing with a weight I could almost feel crackling against my skin. My back touched the cool surface of the hallway wall, sending a shiver that had nothing to do with the heat. Ethan's fingers found my wrist again, but this time there was no hesitation. His grip was firm but gentle, keeping me grounded even as I felt like I was going to float away. His touch was electric, his fingers following my arm, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. I closed my eyes for a moment, but it only intensified everything. The faint scent of soap and warm skin, the damp warmth of his body, the irregular rhythm of our breaths as the distance between us grew narrower. When his hand reached my shoulder, he paused, his thumb brushing the edge of my collarbone. It was the slightest movement, but it felt like the world had slipped from under my feet. I opened my eyes, met his gaze, and the intensity there stole any remaining calm I had. He leaned down, his forehead touching mine, a silent closeness that quickened my pulse. His breath brushed my cheek, a subtle, intoxicating blend of mint and something unique to him. When his lips finally found mine again, they weren't rushed or desperate. Every movement was deliberate and slow, as if he were memorizing me, savoring of forbidden indulgence. The bulge of the package showed through the towel. My mouth watered at him now. Just to have him ash, she moved. The towel shifted slightly, and his hands found my waist, balancing me and pulling me closer until there was no space between us. His touch was everywhere. His fingers followed the curve of my hips, his palms pressing into my back, the warmth of his skin hitting mine like a BR brand. He hugged me and took me to the shower. He turned on the water I didn't have at my house. We continued here. I was curious about the package, so I took it in my hand and opened my mouth. As it disappeared in my mouth, I slowed down and stopped with the sound it made. I hadn't experienced something like this. For a long time, his gaze from above said, "Continue." He raised his head and closed, his eyes tight. It was as if he was deeply moved. He continued rapidly, one after another, saying, "It's coming, trust me, you always experience this excitement. Whether you're experienced or youngin'." This case, I was excited too. I could see that what he was excited about was something big, and I couldn't wait to see it after this thought. There was a big vibration in the package. The liquid from the packet began to flow from the corner of my mouth. It was delicious, but I wasn't full yet. I stood up and slid the packet into my muffin. I was overjoyed as I moved back and forth. He made me feel truly loved. I wasn't sure where I ended, and his began. Our bodies fit together in a familiarity that felt both impossible and inevitable. My hands moved on their own, finding the hard lines of his shoulders, the smooth surface of his chest, my fingers touching the droplets that still clung to his skin. There was a pain in his touch, an unspoken need that mirrored mine when his hands came down, gripped my hips and pulled me closer. I took a small breath, the sound swallowed by his lips, and he kissed me again, deeper this time. Hungrier. Time blurred, the seconds stretched into eternity, and we lost ourselves in each other. Every touch, every breath, every stolen moment felt like something carved from sacredness, something we weren't meant to have but couldn't resist. It was a moment I knew I wouldn't forget, a secret, intimate interlude that will linger in the margins of my mind, whispering about the transgression of boundaries and the dangerous allure of the forbidden.